And the Republican presidential field is already shifting in the wake of the second GOP debate as Americans reveal how they think the top GOP contenders fared at the event. One America's David Espindel has more on the winners and losers in Wednesday's debate and how it may have shaken up the race for the White House in 2016.
One America conducted a poll using independent marketing firm Gravis Marketing to hear from 1,400 Republican voters about how they felt after the main event of the second GOP debate. Let's start with our winners of the night. And the biggest was someone who had to lobby heavily just to make the main stage of the debate, and that's businesswoman Carly Fiorina.
I think women all over this country heard very clearly what Mr. Trump said.
She's got a beautiful face, and I think she's a beautiful woman.
33% of those polled say they feel like Fiorina won the debate. This was a huge increase for the former Hewlett-Packard CEO, who was only invited to the undercard table for the first debate back in August. Trailing 12 points behind her was business mogul Donald Trump. And in third place was Senator Marco Rubio, with 16% of the vote. Taking a look at those who did not poll favorably following the main debate Wednesday, we can see another interesting takeaway. Despite a second-place finish in the winners poll, Donald Trump also finished in second when we asked who the biggest loser of the night was. This shows Trump as a very polarizing figure with very dedicated supporters, but also very strong detractors.
We said no.
Wrong.
We said no, and that's the simple fact.
Don't make things up, Jim.
Don't cut me off.
Come on.
We can see that America felt overwhelmingly that Kentucky Senator Rand Paul lost the debate, collecting 32% of the negative vote. Our respondents also felt Ohio Governor John Kasich had a tough night. We also asked Americans if their opinion of each candidate became more or less favorable after the main debate. Again, we can see the dominance of Carly Fiorina on Wednesday night, with 78% of the respondents saying they have a more favorable view of her now. Marco Rubio followed closely behind, with 71% feeling more favorable about the Florida lawmaker. Staying consistent with our biggest losers poll, Rand Paul and Donald Trump were the only two candidates with more respondents feeling less favorably about them after Wednesday night's performance. We took an overall pulse of the Republican field when asking who our respondents would vote for if the election was held today. Carly Fiorina tied for first place with Donald Trump with 22% of the vote. This is a massive victory for Fiorina and a big jump from our most recent OAN poll from just 2 weeks ago, where the businesswoman held less than 3% of the vote and was polling in 7th place. Marco Rubio also leapt over Dr. Ben Carson and into third place with 15%. Carson fell from second in that same early September poll to fourth. The next GOP debate won't be until late October, as the focus shifts to the Democrats, who will be hosting their first presidential debate of this campaign season in just under 1 month on October 13th. And One America News will be continuing to cover the run for the White House every step of the way. David Espindel, One America News.
But there is no better example, again I say, than the UN weapons inspection system itself. Yes, he has tried to thwart it in every conceivable way, but the discipline, determination, year in, year out effort of these weapons inspectors is doing the job, and we seek to finish the job. Let there be no doubt, we are prepared to act. But Saddam Hussein could end this crisis tomorrow, simply by letting the weapons inspectors complete their mission. He made a solemn commitment to the international community to do that and to give up his weapons of mass destruction a long time ago now. One way or the other, we are determined to see that he makes good on his own promise. Saddam Hussein's Iraq reminds us of what we learned in the 20th century and warns us of what we must know about the 21st. In this century, we learn through harsh experience that the only answer to aggression and illegal behavior is firmness, determination, and, when necessary, action. In the next century, the community of nations may see more and more of the very kind of threat Iraq poses now. A rogue state with weapons of mass destruction, ready to use them or provide them to terrorists, drug traffickers, or organized criminals who travel the world among us unnoticed. If we fail to respond today, Saddam and all those who would follow in his footsteps will be emboldened tomorrow by the knowledge that they can act with impunity, even in the face of a clear message from the United Nations Security Council and clear evidence of a weapons of mass destruction program. But if we act as one, we can safeguard our interests and send a clear message to every would-be tyrant and terrorist that the international community does have the wisdom and the will and the way to protect peace and security in a new era. That is the future I ask you all to imagine. That is the future I ask our allies to imagine. If we look at the past and imagine that future, we will act as one together, and we still have, God willing, a chance to find a diplomatic resolution of this. And if not, God willing, the chance to do the right thing for our children and grandchildren. Thank you very much.
Iraq is a long way from Ohio, but what happens there matters a great deal here. For the risk that the leaders of a rogue state will use nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons against us or our allies is the greatest security threat we face. And it is a threat against which we must and will stand firm.
Or we take some ambiguous third route, which gives him yet more opportunities to develop this program of weapons of mass destruction and continue to press for the release of the sanctions and continue to ignore the solemn commitments that he made.
There are such a thing as international outlaws. I'm not sure China is one, but I'm quite sure Iran and Iraq are.
He will rebuild his arsenal of weapons of mass destruction. And someday, some way, I am certain he will use that arsenal again, as he has 10 times since 1983.
Saddam Hussein certainly has chemical and biological weapons. There's no question about that.
There is unmistakable evidence that Saddam Hussein is working aggressively to develop nuclear weapons and will likely have nuclear weapons within the next 5 years. We also should remember we have always underestimated the progress that Saddam Hussein has been able to make in the development of weapons of mass destruction.
We know he continues to attempt to gain access to additional capability, including nuclear capability. There is a real debate how far off that is, whether it's a matter of years or whether it's a matter of less than that. And so there's much we don't know.
Saddam Hussein, in effect, has thumbed his nose at the world community. And I think that the president is approaching this in the right fashion.
Do you believe we could have disarmament without regime change?
I doubt it. I can support the president. I can support an action against Saddam Hussein because I think it's in the long-term interests of our national security.
Serving on the Intelligence Committee and seeing day after day, week after week, briefings on Saddam's weapons of mass destruction and his plans on using those weapons, he cannot be allowed to have nuclear weapons. It's just that simple.
Bill, I support the president's efforts to disarm Saddam Hussein. I think he was right on in his speech tonight. The lessons we learned following September the 11th or that we can't wait to be attacked again, particularly when it involves weapons of mass destruction. So, regrettably, Saddam has not done the right thing, which is to disarm, and we're left with no alternative but to take action.
When I made the decision to remove Saddam Hussein from power, Congress approved it with strong bipartisan support. While it's perfectly legitimate to criticize my decision or the conduct of the war, it is deeply irresponsible to rewrite the history of how that war began. These critics are fully aware that a bipartisan Senate investigation found no evidence of political pressure to change the intelligence community's judgments related to Iraq's weapons programs. As our troops fight a ruthless enemy determined to destroy our way of life, they deserve to know that their elected leaders who voted to send them to war continue to stand behind them.
Your calculations are on point about all the things that the United States could have spent instead of going to war in Iraq. But how come the U.S. Congress, under the leadership of the Democrats, hasn't exercised the power of the purse and pulled the funding and said, you know what, we're not going to continue in this war?
Well, we have in the House over and over again in the past year, and tried to even before we were in power, but speaking to now that we are, sent bills to the United States Senate over and over again that said that we're certainly not going to leave our troops stranded. But what we're saying is the purpose of the funding should be for the redeployment of our troops out of Iraq in a manner that is responsible, safe, and honorable, and it has to be completed within 1 year.
Washington, where the new Democratic congressional majority drew a line in the sand of sorts with the president on the topic of Iraq. With us tonight, our chief White House correspondent, David Gregory, with more on this. David, good evening.
Brian, good evening. Democrats wasted little time challenging the president over Iraq, objecting to the expected call for a surge of troops, saying that would be, quote, a serious mistake. The president will announce a new strategy for Iraq next week, but today, with the details of a troop surge already public, Democratic leaders shot it down, insisting troops should start coming home in 4 to 6 months.
If he's listening to his commanders, he can't do this.
Barack Obama, a likely 2008 contender, was among the senators who met with the president today and voiced concerns.
Sending more troops in rather than initiating some sort of phased withdrawal makes them feel as if we will be there to prop them up in perpetuity, and that's a mistake.
Administration sources say the president will order a surge of up to 20,000 troops divided between Baghdad and Sunni-dominated Anbar province. Included in the new strategy would be a boost in economic aid. As for the Democrats, they may be unable to stop any call for a troop surge, but with control of Congress now, they do intend to turn up the political heat on the White House. Brian, the first hearing on Iraq is slated for next Wednesday.